So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another webinar organized by the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, ICMEC, and thank you so much for joining us today. As you know, today's webinar focuses on important capacities that countries and nations need to have in order to efficiently prevent and report harm done to children. These mechanisms are all different, but they're all complementary to one another. I'll introduce myself very quickly. My name is Zoe Colpart. I'm the Heroes/Europe Program Manager at the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And I focus on our projects in Europe around the fight against child sexual abuse and exploitation, trafficking, and the safe recovery of missing children. Today's webinar is quite an important one in general, but also for me, because talking about the importance of support and reporting mechanism is really key. And I actually used to work at the Internet Watch Foundation, and I collaborated with tens of partners around the world to launch some reporting portals that we're also touched upon today. So I'm very glad to see some familiar names in the list of participants. I'm delighted to be joined by our great guest speakers today. First of all, Helen Mason, who is the Director of Operations at Child Helpline International. Then Neil Prowse, a Development Manager at the Internet Watch Foundation, and Samantha Wolf, the Head of Global Partnerships and Network Expansion at INHOPE. In this webinar, our expert guests will talk about child helplines, hotlines, and reporting portals. They will explain what they are and what they are key in the country's efforts to combat crimes against children and support children and young people, and how these organizations support countries and nations to develop these important tools internationally. For your information, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on ICMEC's YouTube channel shortly after this live event. And we'll also have time for questions after the presentation. So please don't hesitate to add your questions into the Q&A. As I saw already a few of you doing this, thank you so much for that. And we'll respond to all of them at the end. So to kick off, I'll start sharing my screen and give you an introduction on the three different mechanisms that we will touch upon today and focus on their similarities and differences, but also their importance in a country's toolkit to fight against child sexual abuse and exploitation. So, up. Let me share my screen. It's always a joy to have to deal with technology. Here we go. All right, hopefully you're able to see this. Up. So very quickly, I want to just say a few words on ICMEC and on what we do. So for us at the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, one child missing, abused, or exploited is one too many. But I'm sure this is something that we share across everybody participating in this webinar today. Our mission, so we advance child protection and safeguard vulnerable children by powering the global search for children who are missing, by disrupting the economics and mechanics of commercial child exploitation, and by training frontline professionals to prevent and respond to cases of child abuse and exploitation, as well as children going missing. Digging now into the topic at hand today, I really want to insist on the importance of reporting any type of abuse that children are facing. And when looking at child sexual exploitation abuse, CSCA, we know that this is a global problem that knows no border. And everyone from country leaders and decision makers to family members has a role to play. We all have a role to play to support children who are facing this type of abuse. Reporting potential child sexual exploitation and abuse is one of the ways that we can help as a society in the fight against child sexual exploitation and abuse. As we were talking about very important mechanisms today, I just want to take a small step back and talk about the Model National Response Framework, which is a very important framework that gathers best practices to support countries and organizations to prevent and tackles CSEA. Basically, it's very important guidelines that help a country or nation have the best possible system to ensure that children are as protected as they can be. So the way the framework works is that different stakeholder groups are given focus individually and as a collective. So for example, looking at policy and governance, victims and survivors at the societal level, etc. And each group focuses on different capabilities to develop in order to efficiently prevent and investigate CSEA, child sexual exploitation and abuse, and support victims. That also includes protecting children from harm, protecting victims from further harm, preventing perpetrators from committing more crimes, and ensuring law enforcement are given enough resources, tools, and technology to investigate CSEA crimes and support its victims and their families. And importantly, for today's webinar, Internet reporting tools such as child helplines, hotlines, and reporting portals are integral aspects in any country's efforts to fight child sexual exploitation and abuse. So they are part of that framework and part of that, a country or nation's efforts to ensure children are as safe as they can be. Another interesting similar initiative that is focusing on Europe, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but it's still a very important one to mention, is Safer Internet Centers. They inform, advise, and assist children, parents, teachers, and carers on digital questions and fight against child sexual abuse and exploitation. These centers, Safer Internet Centers, usually offer three kinds of services that are similar to what I mentioned. So first, a national awareness center organized by the InSafe network. Second, a helpline also organized by InSafe. And third, a hotline organized through the International Association of Internet Hotlines, so INHOPE, which Samantha will talk about in more details today. Now focusing on those three different mechanisms that I mentioned. So the first one is child helplines. They provide support and counseling services, contacts to legal services, and other assistance to children and young people. So the goal of child helplines is to support children and young people in providing an accessible, non-judgmental, and trusted platform to discuss issues and get support. The audience, usually those child helplines can support children up to 18 years or young people up to 25 years old. The type of platform, you have an online platform for child helplines, so you can send emails or chats, and also offline. So some helplines offer phone and in-person appointments as well to better be able to support children. In terms of ownership, those helplines are based at national level. So they are usually led by civil society organizations, government bodies, or social enterprises. And the supporting organization that is being represented today by Helen is Child Helpline International, that is supporting a network of 159 members from 136 countries and territories. So I know Helen will talk a lot more about helplines in her presentation just after this one, but you can already have a look at their website at childhelplineinternational.org. The second mechanism that I want to talk about today, and again, these are very quick introductions just so that you understand what each mechanism is, but also their differences between them. Hotlines. They are a physical entity that receive child sexual abuse and exploitation content, assess it, and seek to get it removed from the internet. The goal of hotlines is to assess the illegality of the content according to national and international law, and to notify internet service providers for the swift removal of the content from the internet, and to report the case to the relevant law enforcement entity for victim identification purposes. The audience of those hotlines, so who can engage with them, who can report, basically all internet users. Usually platforms are web pages, and they are owned at a national level, which is a key difference to reporting portals that I will mention just after. So usually those hotlines are led by civil society organizations or governmental bodies, internet service provider associations sometimes, domain registry, or even sometimes the police. And INHOPE, the International Network of Internet Hotlines, is the supporting organization with a network of 50 members hotlines from 46 countries around the world. Hotlines become members once they meet all the criteria. And I believe Samantha Wolf will talk about these criteria in her presentation. So again, you can have a look at INHOPE's website, inhope.org, if you want more information. But I would definitely invite you to wait until Sam's presentation before doing that. And the final mechanism that I want to talk about today is reporting portals. So portals are customized web pages where people can safely report suspected pictures and videos of child sexual exploitation and abuse in countries that do not currently have a hotline. So this is really the key here. Hotlines are owned by the country. The ownership is at country level, but portals are there to fill up a gap where a country might not necessarily have the resources to develop their own hotline. So portals can support in that time. The goal here is to assess the legality of the content according to national and international law. So very similarly to the hotlines that I mentioned just before, and notify internet service providers for the swift removal of the content from the internet and report the case to the relevant law enforcement for victim identification purposes. Again, the audience, all internet users, everybody is able to anonymously send a report to report child sexual abuse and exploitation material. And the platform type they are basically simple web pages. And I know Neil will show an example in his presentation. As I mentioned, the ownership is comparatively to the hotlines, it's not at national level. It is owned by the UK hotline, the Internet Watch Foundation, which is an NGO, with in-country partners. And as I mentioned, the supporting organization, IWF, is currently heading a network of 51 reporting portals in 49 countries and territories and cross-country organizations. And in all of these territories and countries, working with partners to ensure that the portal is known and the awareness is there in the country to make sure that people are aware of where to report child sexual abuse material. Again, you can have a look at IWF's website, but Neil will give more detail on the reporting portals and the reporting process in his presentation. Now that hopefully you have a good understanding of those three different mechanisms, how they complement one another, but also what their differences are, I think this, really shows that working together is absolutely crucial. Even through all these different mechanisms, collaboration between organizations is key. As I mentioned, child helplines, hotlines, and portals are complementary tools. Child Helpline International, INHOPE, and IWF have expertise in developing these mechanisms to protect children. Child helplines provide direct support to a child in distress, while hotlines and portals help remove images and videos of one of the worst experiences the child has been through and enable everyone to act against child sexual abuse by reporting that content online. These tools should be available to everyone in every country, as they represent a strong global commitment to fight against child sexual abuse and exploitation. I'll now stop my presentation. After all our presentations, I'll share with you a resources slide where you can find all the links to everything. But first, I really want to give the opportunity to our fabulous guests to tell more about their own mechanism and their organizations. So thank you very much. And the first presentation that we will have from our guest speaker is from Helen Mason, who is Director of Operations at Child Helpline International. And in her work, she focuses on a wide range of topics from development of strategy and membership engagement to partnering development and fundraising, to partnership development and fundraising. And Helen will talk about the role of child helplines in supporting children and young people and Child Helpline International's global network of helpline. Thank you so much, Helen. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks again for this great introduction, Zoe, and welcome to everyone that's joined us today. It's absolutely great to see so many people with us. And I'm really delighted to see a number of members joining us today as well, a number of Child Helpline members. So thank you for being here today with us. Yes, indeed. After that wonderful introduction from Zoe, I will kick off with talking about the role of Child Helplines. I'll give an introduction to the work of Child Helplines and then drill a bit further down into how we work in the fight against online child sexual exploitation and abuse. I'll also share some of the data that we collect and some case summaries with you. So I have 10 to 15 minutes to talk to you today, and we have some wonderful speakers coming up. So I'm really excited to hear about what my colleagues have to share with us today as well. So I'm going to hope that this is going to run okay now. Okay, so I'm the Director of Operations at Child Helpline International, and Child Helpline International is the global network of child helplines around the world, working in over 130 countries. Child helplines are there 24/7 to support children and young people. And as you heard in the introduction from Zoe, child helplines provide a very essential service to children and young people on any issue that might be of importance to them. And child helplines actively listen to and provide support for children and young people and play a big role in prevention of violence, for example, empowering children to take action to protect themselves and improve their welfare. Child helplines are at national level key to the child protection system in the sense that they provide a low threshold entry point into the child protection system. And as you can imagine, then it's important that child helplines are developed in terms of the referral services that surround them within the child protection system. Child Helpline International, well, I mentioned that I'm joining you from Amsterdam today, and we are the global network of child helplines. We're based in Amsterdam. We're actually marking our 20th anniversary year this year. So we're very, very delighted to have been around for 20 years, but with big thanks to our members around the world who founded the organization in 2003. And since then, the 49 members have come to 160 members and over, and we're growing all of the time, bringing on new members and new services. So this is very much a global network. Of course, there are still some places in the world where there are not child helplines, and we work very hard to support governments and other agencies to support child helplines. As an organization working together with child helplines, we are a collective of like-minded organizations. We do have a common agenda. And what's very important is that we work with our members to develop strategy, to identify needs, and work together to enhance the work of child helplines. So our organization is very much a bottom-up, membership-led organization, and you'll see that through the work that we do and also in our governance structure. We advocate for the rights of children and young people. We support the creation of child helplines around the world, and we enhance the recognition of child helplines as an essential mechanism in child protection systems. I wanted just to focus now a little bit more on what we do as Child Helpline International before we talk further about the role of child helplines in the fight against online child sexual exploitation and abuse. One aspect which I think is really important and may not be that everyone is aware is the data that we collect from our members is really essential information to provide an insight into what is affecting the lives of children. So this data is collected firsthand from children and young people who speak to counsellors around the world 24/7 through a variety of means, through email, through chat, through voice as well. And through that information, where we collect and analyze that data, we're able to get a snapshot on a global, regional, and a national level of what the issues are that affect children and young people. And as you can imagine, this is really vital information for policy and programming. It's vital information to understand where the gaps are in child protection systems. And this temperature taking is a crucial mechanism to understand where children and young people are experiencing things that are becoming emerging trends, for example. Now, with that information and combined with the input from our members, we co-create learning opportunities with our members. And I'm talking about e-learnings, I'm talking about toolkits, I'm talking about face-to-face and in-person trainings. A big part of what we do is taking the best from our members and sharing it with all of them, cross-pollinating all of this information to help other members to improve their services. And then the third thing, as you see on the screen here, is really around technology. And of course, technology is always important. In some ways, it feels even more important right now in terms of developments around AI, in terms of developments around prevention and protection tools that are inbuilt into devices, for example, but also in terms of the ways that we can prevent and protect children and young people. So as an organization with our vantage point as a global network, we're able to work with different partners to support our members to identify the right technologies to work with, to make investments, to work together to co-create different tools and technologies for our members to increase their reach. And that can be not only an increasing reach in terms of bringing on new channels for child helplines, but it can also be, for example, in data collection tools as well. Then if I move on now to evidence-based advocacy, you can imagine the kind of feedback loop in terms of the information we collect from children and young people provides a very rich source of information, and we are duty-bound to use that information to amplify the voices of children and young people. And we do that by promoting our reports into global policymakers, UN mechanisms, regional bodies, and also at national level. And we hope to influence the evolution of global policies and practices to enhance the protection of children and young people. So as you can see, there's quite a holistic approach to the way we work in terms of what we're doing to support our members around the world. And what you might also understand is that there has to be a certain quality to what we do. And of course, we have a vantage point, again, as an organization working with our members to set quality standards together with our members. So a very important development, well, really since the beginning of our work, is to understand what is a good practice and to understand how those good practices can be proliferated around the network. So presently we have 9 core quality standards which cover, for example, a child rights-based approach, governance, for example, continuity planning, etc. So this is another mechanism that we support our members with to identify gaps in their own services and gaps in their own organizational development and help them together with the knowledge in the network to fill those gaps. I'll move on now. So in terms of the data I mentioned, this is really the crucial information that children and young people are sharing with us, and we are collecting this information. And you can find much of this information on our website in terms of our data reports. What we're talking about is the contacts that come through to child helplines, and then what happens with those contacts. So sometimes you can imagine that a contact comes through to a child helpline and information is requested, information is shared, there's a discussion, a solution found perhaps together with a counsellor. But there are also those contacts that become cases, that become counselling contacts. And as you can see that not all the contacts to child helplines actually become a counselling contact. And that is, of course, dependent on the child or the young person's needs. We know that this is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of the data we collect. And of course, there are many more different types of contacts to child helplines, for example, over the website or from downloading resources or peer-to-peer support through our child helpline members' websites. If I just take a moment to look at some of the data, in terms of the recent data that we have on violence, you might notice in this overview here that the numbers are not huge in terms of what we know to be the actual prevalence of crimes against children and young people, especially child sexual exploitation abuse. And this is an interesting point for us in many ways as well, because what we also aware of is that there are major issues, for example, in underreporting and disclosure of child sexual abuse, and that's the same for online child sexual exploitation and abuse. And that is, of course, due to various reasons, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. So that, of course, gives certain actions for Child Helpline International and for our members. So around raising awareness about how to come forward, how to disclose, that it's confidential when you reach to a child helpline, that your information won't be shared with anybody else. And these are really crucial characteristics around what Child Helpline members are doing day in, day out. We know that children and young people, when they report and they disclose any kind of online child sexual exploitation abuse, that often they've never told anybody else. The child helpline counsellor at the end of the chat, at the end of the phone, is the first person that they've disclosed to. And that's a really important message to get to children and young people, so that we can reach young people when they need it most, but also in terms of prevention and understanding the needs of someone that's been in one of these horrific situations, but getting that information that there's a child helpline there for you, and that the child helpline will know what to do to support you and help you through this personal crisis. So that this underreporting is very important for us, and at the moment we're doing research together with our partners and also in violence to understand what those barriers are, so that we can address those barriers and hopefully encourage more people, more children and young people to come forward. The other point I wanted to make around data collection is, as you can imagine, in terms of data collection approaches around the world, and in terms of data collection frameworks, these are very different country to country. And what we also do as an organization is we attempt to harmonize that data collection. So in terms of categorization, in terms of training of counselors to help them to categorize the contacts in the right place, so that we get a very good picture of what is coming through. Now, it seems that online child sexual abuse and exploitation is one of the most difficult areas for categorization, because it might not always be obvious that there's an online element to the kind of abuse that's happening. So it may go under a different category in a child helpline data collection. And this is a constant discussion in our network to try and improve the visibility of the kind of cases that come through, so that we can respond to them not only in terms of preventative methods, but also in terms of communication and putting the resources in the right place. And then on a larger scale, we can use that data to influence policymakers so they can understand the kinds of legislations that are needed. So that is another interesting aspect. And I think that what would be certainly our focus for the coming years is how technology and machine learning can help us in some of this data categorization as well. So some of the investments we do in technology are looking into how we can look at some transcripts of, for example, chat contacts. Now we can use that information to really understand help-seeking behaviour at a deeper level and help the child helpline counsellors in that journey when they're talking to a child or a young person. I'm going to move on now to the next slide, just to show you a quick snapshot of the gender division in terms of child sexual exploitation and abuse. So as you can see that in this slide, we report that the figures for those identifying as girls is slightly higher than those that would be identifying as boys. Now, there are many reasons for this, and I think that our data also shows that in general, more girls contact child helplines than boys. So that's a factor that we do take into account. And we know that maybe the barriers for boys, for example, to reach out via voice are higher than girls through the research we've done. And we know that boys prefer to use, for example, like a chat channel or an online channel. So these are more general comments, let's say, but these are things that we would be researching with our partners as as we collect data and as we get further insights. Zoe mentioned already the model national response, and I want to also bring it up here as well, because it's, I think, one of the best opportunities we have as partners and in the global fight against online child sexual exploitation abuse. I'm sure that many of you are really familiar with this overview. I think the simplicity of this tool is really where it adds value, and it can be seen like a blueprint, I suppose, of what it should exist at a national level in order to best fight online child sexual exploitation and abuse. You can find this model on the We Protect website, and I'm sure we'll be sharing it afterwards with the resources. As you can see, I've highlighted there in the victim section the role of the child helpline in terms of victim reporting, support and ongoing assistance. And you can easily see the other actors that are in this model national response. I think what is worth articulating as well is to understand the different linkages between these different actors. So you can imagine the child helpline really can't work in isolation and needs to foster links between the different actors. So I'll give you an example that working with law enforcement is vital to understand what child helplines need to do when they need to report the crime that's taken place, or for example, being able to refer to a portal and vice versa. So this is a really important model in terms of providing a blueprint at national level, and I'm sure that many of you working in different fields have seen how this mechanism has been quite powerful and a tool to help in the planning, but also the provision of services to respond to online child sexual exploitation and abuse. So I'm just going to conclude now in terms of, you know, what the value add and what the plus points are really in terms of child helplines in responding to child sexual exploitation abuse. And I think that one of the things that is very important is making sure that child helplines are there where children are. So that means, you know, making sure that there's ways to connect through social media, through gaming platforms, for example, enhancing the ability for children and young people to find a child helpline with the least clicks, with the least, you know, time taken to try and find online where, you know, where you can reach out for support. It's about also raising awareness of the child helpline. So it's, you know, it has to be a very proactive approach in terms of raising awareness. And, you know, you can imagine that's done, and you've seen that at your own country level, where child helplines are promoted through various mechanisms online, through different agencies, through schools, quite crucially as well. Another aspect which I touched on before is this aspect of confidentiality. So talking to a child helpline counsellor, it's completely confidential. No one's going to share your information. You won't be requested to give identifying information unless it's a vital emergency on that moment. So that aspect is really quite important. And we know through other research that taboos and stigmas really mean that confidentiality is one of the most important characteristics with a child helpline in terms of disclosure. In terms of empowerment of the child, yes, of course, you can imagine that this speaks for itself. This is about, you know, empowering someone who's been through a kind of situation like this, or is ongoing experience, to take some kind of control. And then in terms of referral networks, I mentioned earlier with the model national response as an example, but if we can think of the child protection system and then the child helpline, you know, like the spider in the web, connecting the different services together. So that's how I like to visualize the way that it works. So we talked a little bit about this in Zoe's presentation as well. And I think one of the real reasons why we wanted to do this webinar today is to be able to articulate what the differentiating factors are between hotlines and helplines and portals. It's really important to understand this because we all play a very different role, but equally we play a role in supporting each other as well. And so without the child helpline, you know, being able to have the victim response, but without the portal being able to take the reports, you can imagine that those things need to work together, and we need to be the interlocutor between these kinds of services. So as you see on the screen there, the child helplines really are about the prevention, protection, the direct contact with children and young people, and also that mechanism to feedback what children and young people are telling us. So we're able to do that, you know, with our partners. In terms of specifically around this issue, we're also able to raise awareness about what happens when you contact a child helpline, and when you can identify, you know, that something's happening in your life that you should be reporting. And then we can signpost through those mechanisms to hotlines and portals as well. So child helplines play a key role in raising awareness about hotlines and portals. And I think you might know this, but just to mention as well, in some cases, the portals and the reporting lines are actually housed in the same place as the child helpline. So in many countries, the lines are very close. And so that's also very important, I think, brings other opportunities and learnings as well in terms of how these services interact and work together. I'm going to show you a couple of case summaries here, just to, you know, we're always working hard, you know, on behalf of our organisations and our members, but really we're all working for the child that's called the helpline, who needs to talk about an experience that's happened to them. So whenever we present these case summaries, really it's about putting these stories forward so people can understand and they can really see how these cases are really desperate and what the child helplines and the counsellors are being trained to respond to. So there's a number of cases coming up on the screen here. And really, these are very common cases. These are anonymized cases that we can just use to illustrate what some of the kinds of issues are coming through to our members and what our members tell us. So I wanted to say as well, in light of these cases, this is a really interesting aspect in terms of learning from what children and young people tell us, because that helps us to train our members and the counsellors that are working at child helplines on what kind of cases to expect, how to recognise cases, but also what to do. So you can imagine with technology and how to remove and report, the child helpline counsellors need to also understand what the mechanisms are, in device, in app. And so this is a really important aspect of understanding when children and young people come forward, how we can also use that information to improve services in the future. So this is the final case summary here, and I think I mentioned already you can find lots of information on our website in terms of data, reports and different summaries, different toolkits, etc. You can please go to our website and read some of our reports. I really always want to showcase our members. We're nothing without our members, and we're here to serve our members. And we really depend on what they tell us. And that information is so vital for us in terms of developing different responses and supporting them with e-learnings, etc. It's also important to understand what they're seeing and what they're experiencing as well. Also, from the perspective that we're really conscious of the well-being of counsellors and what counsellor burnout and turnover of staff can do to a service as well. So we're always interested to hear what experiences are happening at the front line, as I put it here. So you can read the information here that the child helpline counsellors are understanding on a daily basis the kind of stigmas and the taboos that exist around reporting cases of online child sexual exploitation and abuse. And I think, what I would also bring in here is that working in partnership, as Zoe said, is so vital. We know we don't work in isolation. We can't work in isolation. We all need to be focused on a holistic response, with each playing our different roles to be able to actually make a difference. And one of the partners we work with quite closely lately is, for example, the Brave movement. So bringing the survivor voices to our work and putting that at forefront of some of our communication as well, to help us to also include those voices and make sure that those voices are heard in our advocacy and also in our recommendations as well. So I'm going to just bring another slide now about working with the portals and the reporting lines in terms of how the differences are again. So I think Zoe covered this really well as well, but just explaining, the differences between what a counsellor does and a hotline analyst. As I mentioned before, child helplines and hotlines are working together. They're referring and reporting to each other, and they're improving visibility in terms of the different data they collect. And I will illustrate that a little bit further. So I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation about investments in technology, and one of the important developments around the technology is developing a omni-channel platform, so that child helplines have available a place to collect their data, a place to be able to expand channels, but also to be able to automatically connect cases to different services. So what I'm talking about is the Asalo platform, which has been developed and launched lately, which is a very much state-of-the-art platform that child helplines can customize at the national level. And what we can also do is work with partners to ensure that those links to portals and reporting hotlines are also already built into the back end. So as you can imagine, there are many steps in that kind of customization process, but this is another example how working together and using technology can help us to shorten the lines and make the responses more timely, and make sure that we're collecting information in a way that is most useful. Further resources, as I mentioned, you can find some of these on our website. We have many resources, but I chose to just highlight a couple here. So the data reports that we have Actually, tomorrow we will launch a new report on the role of child helplines in protecting children in Europe against sexual exploitation and abuse. So you can look out for that being shared on our LinkedIn tomorrow and through our website. And another resource from 2020 is the technical guidance resource, which is basically looking at how the MNR can be implemented at national level with the child helpline as a focus. So I'm concluding my presentation now. I want to thank you for your time today. I'm again delighted to have had so many people with us today, and it's such a pleasure and an honour to be able to speak about the work of child helplines and also together with our partners. And I welcome any questions now in the chat, and also, of course, afterwards if you want to reach out. And vitally, if you are from a location or a country with no child helpline, please get in touch. We're busy with UNICEF and governments and other stakeholders really at the stages of starting and scaling up child helplines in many different places. So I'll be more than happy to share information that might be relevant for your country. So I'm concluding with thanks again to Zoe and my other colleagues, and thank you to you all for listening.
Great, thank you so much, Helen. Really interesting presentation. I'll note specifically how you insisted on having those child helplines and just resources in general available and easily accessible to children and young people. And really, having this awareness effort from helplines, but also from all the other partners around to make sure that young people and children know where to report. Thank you so much. I'll now pass on to Neil Prowse, who is the development manager at the Internet Watch Foundation, and he leads the team responsible for industry memberships and services to block, disrupt, and alert against online images of child sexual abuse. Neil will talk about some of the data that IWF comes across in their hotline every day, and now reporting and how reporting portals help curb the issue of child sexual abuse material when countries cannot have their own national hotlines. So I'll share the screen now. Please let me know if it's all good. Neil, let me know.
Thank you, Zoe.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Great to see you again, Zoe. Helen, a great presentation once again. Really good to hear CHI's perspective on tackling this horrible area that we have to work in. So as Zoe said, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction of IWF, and we'll go into some of the data. I'm not going to go into depth on the data today, but we do have a lot more behind the data I'm showing you today, and then touch on portals and a little bit about awareness and the work that IWF does. So Zoe, if you could flick on to the next slide, please. So IWF we are a not-for-profit child protection charity based in the UK near Cambridge, just north of London. We do all kinds of work in the space of tackling child sexual abuse material online. We work very closely with tech. It's very centric to what we do, technology, in combating the work. IWF fundamentally identifies images and videos of child sexual abuse online, whether that's reported to us or if we proactively search for it, wherever they're found on the internet. We then work with our amazing partners around the world to have that content removed from the internet permanently. We've been doing this for 26 years, allowing people a safe place to report, anonymously report child sexual abuse content to us, to the experts to then do the assessment. We work in collaboration with industry, over close to 190 global technology companies now, that in the collaboration we have taken our cutting edge data sets. Not only can we remove content, we can also have it blocked whilst and alerted whilst that content is being taken down. Next slide, please. Sorry. So there are three aspects to us: we prevent, we disrupt, and we care. We are independent from government and law enforcement. I think that's very important to allow us to be operational in the way that we are and effective in the way that we work. But we obviously work very closely with both of those bodies, as well as other child protection charities around the world and industry. We are largely funded by the internet industry. I'll bring up some of the members that we work with in a second, but I also want to point out that we have a very good relationship specifically with Nominet, who have stepped in to provide us some funding for 3 years since the UK opted to leave the European Union. We're very proud of the fact that the IWF is an INHOPE hotline, one of the founding members of INHOPE hotlines around the world. So we play a very active role in that. But within what we do as well, we've generated or created our own portals, which is what Zoe mentioned earlier, and Helen has as well. So that really is 51, soon to be 52 portals around the world who do not have the physical setup in country to do that, can lean on the IWF hotline and assessors and analysts here to do that work on their behalf remotely. And finally, we are 1/3 of the UK Safer Internet Centre. So we work alongside ChildNet and Southwest Grid for Learning. Again, I'll touch on those in a second. Next slide, please. Sorry. So in our office here in Cambridge, UK, we have an entire floor that is dedicated to analysts, and that is their job, day in, day out, to have eyes-on assessment of potential child sexual abuse to verify whether it is or isn't and the severity of that. We do use elements of machine learning to support the work we do, but fundamentally every single image that comes through IWF has had human eyes on, and we're very proud of that and the high level of accuracy, and importantly for industry members, it removes the possibility of false positives as well. I mentioned technology for good. That could be anything from our intelligent crawler system, which we can target particular areas of the internet and to see whether that creates matches with known child sexual abuse content. But also we have a whole package of different services and data sets, alert systems that we can provide to multiple sectors within the internet industry. Next slide, please, Zoe. So as you can see, this is a snapshot of our members. Our membership continually grows year on year. We're very pleased with that as more and more organizations step up and take a real keen focus on the protection of not only their customers, but their staff as well. Their own brand is important to them, that they have a safe environment. And most importantly, the protection of children, to make sure that they are not re-victimized, having their images shown again on the internet. I'm not going to individually pick out any of these members. They're all important to us. And they contribute in many different ways. But the key here is that they come from multiple sectors. So it's not just about internet service providers or social media giants. We have organizations from the hotel sector, from online education, from filterers, from top level domains, and so on. So it's really key that we have this broad breadth of membership and collaboration to make our work as effective as possible with the companies that are providing those services to the end user. Next slide, please, Zoe. As I mentioned, Safer Internet Centre. So there are 3 aspects to that. It's a helpline through ChildNet. It's a hotline as well, which we provide. IWF provide the service. And we also have Southwest Grid for Learning, who focus primarily on the educational sector to make sure that schools are being kept safe online and the children within the schools are kept safe online. And between us, we run the UK's Safer Internet Day each year. Next slide, please. Sorry. So the next two slides are just going to pull out a couple of the statistics. This is from 2022 figures. Next Tuesday, we have our annual launch, for the year that has just completed. So new statistics will be coming out. But for the moment, in the last year, we looked at, or we assessed 375,230 reports. So that's human assessment of those reports. Of those reports by analysts, 255,580 were confirmed to have child sexual abuse content within as their image and within the website that or web page that we've found. That could be we assess it against UK sentencing guidelines, which is severities A, B, and C. A being the worst, C is still very much criminal in nature, and each one of those 255,000 reports could contain one single child sexual abuse image on a web page, or it could contain hundreds, if not thousands, within that web page or website. So we're talking about the assessment and removal of millions of images of child sexual abuse throughout 2022. There are various trends we're seeing. One of them that we have noted throughout the pandemic and beyond the pandemic is initially there was a spike in images of girls aged 11 to 13, and that has shifted to 7 to 10-year-old, predominantly girls, who are being groomed into performing sexual acts online. And I'm going to touch on that again in a moment, but it's a shocking statistic that we're seeing a lot of this remote abuse continuing to happen on the internet. Next slide, please. So in that category C, so very much criminal, but on the severity levels, the lowest of the criminal levels. This is where we're having those self-generated images where children are being coerced, tricked, groomed into sharing images of themselves online by, they think perhaps it's a boyfriend or girlfriend on the other side of the camera, but actually it's a remote abuser trying to get that first image. And once they have that first image, then it's a hook to try to extract more. Often the victim is typically alone, occasionally with others, perhaps a sibling, and predominantly it is in the what we would call a safe haven, a bedroom or a bathroom in the home of that child. So once captured, these images can then be recirculated again and again on the internet for years, unless we take action to have them removed, which is primarily what the hotline service is about. What's key to this is at no point should any blame be put on the victim. A child can never be a victim of this. They can never be seen to be willingly contributing to this, because they are under the age of consent and should therefore never be considered as a victim in this. Sorry, next slide, please, Zoe. So reporting portals is a very important tool of the IWF. As I said, we actually have 51, and we're soon to have Cameroon is coming online quite soon. It's just going to be funded by one of our key members, which is MTN from South Africa. The key to these is that it allows us to cover very wide and diverse group of people and nations around the world, where there is not currently an INHOPE in a physical center to allow that in-country reporting. So this is, if you like, a stopgap between having nothing and having a hotline, that we allow those portals to be there. They're very easy to use. They're in multiple languages. You can see there's 17 different languages, and we're very appreciative of End Violence Against Children Fund, which Zoe will know very well in her time at IWF. That they helped fund many of those portals to date. Next slide, please. So this is currently where we have reporting portals around the world. As you can see, they are country specific, with the exception of perhaps the last two on the list. So that's very, very pleased to say ICMEC. We have an arrangement with them as a international reporting portal to cover countries where they don't have a hotline or a portal to date. So there is again a stopgap in place and a mechanism for people to be able to report. And similarly in Africa, many of your presenters today have been part of the campaign in the last year and a half in Africa to raise awareness and capacity building. And within that, one of our partners was MTN, and they have funded a child safety online Africa portal as well, similar in nature to the ICMEC one, to cover across national boundaries. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot or example of what a typical portal looks like. We do brand them slightly differently depending on our portal partners. We always work in partnership with an in-country partner. In this case, you can see for Zambia, it was Zicta. We have a very close and productive relationship with them. And to work through them, they're very, very simplistic in nature. You ask, is this child sexual abuse you're reporting? Yes, no. Yes, then you move on. No, then unfortunately the process stops there, and then we can signpost to other places, because IWF, our focus is only on child sexual abuse and material. So unfortunately, we are not. We don't have the tools or capacity to build other potential threats and harms online at this point. Next slide, please, Zoe. So once a, sorry, I've lost you for a second. Once a report has come through to us, I think it's important to understand what happens next behind that. So there are various phases that we work through. First of all, that report comes into IWF. As I mentioned, if there's no child sexual abuse content, then no further action is taken from our side. If there is child sexual abuse, then we will action that work, and we will move on to having the child sexual abuse confirmed and the content stored for evidence. Zoe, are you still able to hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
You are. Okay. It's just I lost you for a second, so just bear with me a second. Okay. My screen went blank, so apologies for that. I'm just making sure that I'm still with you. You can still hear me. Okay. So when we process, so that then works through a very systematical process of we screenshot every single phase of assessing an image. This is evidence that we retain for reporting to police, and we store that evidence if in case it was ever needed by law enforcement purposes for a prosecution. If that content is hosted here where we're based in the UK, then we have the legal powers to produce those takedown notices to a UK hosted internet content provider, service provider. If it's hosted outside of the UK, then we will work with other bodies. If there is an INHOPE hotline, then our point of reference would be to report to the country's INHOPE hotline. They in turn would then action to the takedown notice within their country, or whatever process and policy they need to follow to meet local policies and law enforcement in those countries. If there's no INHOPE hotline in that particular country, then we will turn to Interpol or an equivalent law enforcement body in the country to have that content removed. Here in the UK, we have content removed within seconds, if not minutes of having it actioned. Sometimes when we have to report the content that is hosted outside the UK, wherever it is in the world, it can take longer. So one of the aspects that IWF deliver in that is blocking services to industry. So we can block the URLs, the web pages where that content is hosted. We can block the images. We can create alerts to the hosting sites, etc. So that stops the images being uploaded again or viewed whilst they're in the process of being taken down. So a very key point to the process. Next slide, please, Zoe.
No matter what.
So actually, just a short video, which I think would be quite interesting to understand a little bit more about reporting portals. Thanks, Zoe.
No matter what country you are in, online child sexual abuse images and videos are a very real problem, and the challenges that go with tackling it are far-reaching. Stopping access to this content doesn't just stop at creating the right mechanisms for reporting. It requires the right people working together. At the Internet Watch Foundation, we bring together governments, law enforcement, the online industry, and civil society to do what's needed to eliminate images of child sexual abuse from the internet. We work with you to create a customized IWF portal for your country, where anyone can report the imagery. Confidential reports are then sent to a team of highly trained analysts who will assess the images and videos. Through a collaboration with international law enforcement partners, we ensure the content is located and removed. And all this is done without the high costs of setting up individual systems. The IWF portal is trusted by a whole host of organizations, including the technology agencies of the UN and Commonwealth. Be part of the IWF family, the most successful hotline in the world at removing online child sexual abuse images. Contact us to discuss your needs.
Thank you, Zoe. So if you require any more information about portals, please do check our website. Just Google search IWF reporting portals, and there's a lot of information on our website. Or feel free to contact me directly or through Zoe or one of my colleagues after this webinar. So within the bad, we do see signs of good. And I think it's important that we tell Jess's story as well. Jess isn't her real name, but this is a real scenario and case that happened through our hotline, and is very, we see it many times. But in this particular case, images were reported to us of Jess, who was believed to be aged 11 to 13, who had been coerced into performing sexual acts and sharing them online. So we had an anonymous report come in, and through the proactive work of our analyst team, we infiltrated forums. Predators wanted to find more images of Jess, and through that investigative work, our analysts were able to identify or pinpoint her location down to a particular school in a particular area. We then reported that to the National Crime Agency here in the UK, which led to the safeguarding of Jess by police and social services. And that was it. That information was fed back to us, which is so rewarding for an analyst to see that a child has actually been rescued from the abuse that is happening through the work that we've undertaken. Sadly, we see this happening every day, but we do occasionally see, get that feedback of the positive news stories that come out of it. Next slide, please, Zoe. So I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the other areas of work that we get involved with. So prevention campaigns is very important. If we can stop a child being abused in the first place by empowering them, then we will do so. We've run some hard-hitting campaigns here in the UK over the last few years. We have things like Report Remove, and our Africa campaign, awareness and capacity building and law enforcement campaign over the last 18 months has been very effective as well. Really, it is about there were two aspects to the UK campaign. One was focused on the children themselves to use their social media platforms to empower them to recognize the potential signs and the power to say no. And we did interviews before and after with children, before they'd seen the campaign work, and most of them, well, nearly all of them afterwards said they felt a lot more empowered to recognize and actually do something and stand up and say no and report this, rather than just ignoring it or actually becoming a victim of it. And sorry, if you could just flick to the next slide. And then on the parents and carers side, for time reasons, I'm not going to play the full video today, but if you go to our website, you can see the talk video. It's a very hard-hitting video that follows the story through a family home of people just basically making their way up to this girl's bedroom and coercing her into sharing images of herself. This has an educational pack where lots of signposting about where parents, carers can get information online and how to talk to their children, to recognize the signs and to help them recognize the potential of becoming victims in the first place, the child. The next slide is, I think I've got one final video. I'd like to leave you with this video, and then I thank you after that. But I think this is a very powerful video. It's one I do like to share, so I hope you enjoy the video. It's only about 90 seconds. Thanks, Zoe.
We have never been more connected. Every one of us spins a thread of our stories into a vast tapestry. Countless interactions linking us together, bringing out the best in us. But for some, enabling the worst. Lurking between the seams, a maze of prying eyes, speaking the unspeakable, gazing uninvited, invading privacy, trying to strip the innocence from children. Sickening scenes captured on film, each pixel a relic of a horror no one should bear. Those ugly acts are jagged stones, thrown at our human fabric, ripping ladders of hurt. And every time they're shared, the gaps tear wider. The worst moments of a child's life dredged from their past, to trap them in agonizing echoes. But even in the deepest dark, there is hope. A global patchwork of kind people, beacons shining light into the shadows. We watch what no other eyes should see, so that we can delete it, trace and erase each replica, mend the gaping seams to help victims reclaim some peace and dignity. The challenge may feel insurmountable, but we face it down every day to make this net connecting us a safer place.
Thank you, Zoe. And just a final thank you slide from me. My email is there if anyone wants to contact me directly, neil@iwf.org.uk, and my colleague Thomas at iwf.org.uk. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. It was not the first time I watched that video, and yet still the same effect. It's really powerful. Thank you so much, Neil. Again, really appreciated how you presented some of the data that you see at IWF's hotline, and again made I think again very clear differentiation between hotlines and portals, which I believe Sam will expand upon just now. So. Just a quick introduction. Samantha Wolf is the head of global partnerships and network expansion at INHOPE, and her work is to establish national internet hotlines around the globe. She will talk about the importance of hotlines in a country's national efforts against child sexual abuse material, and how a country can be supported to develop its own. Samantha, thank you so much for joining. I'm also very grateful to everybody for still staying on. I know we are running out, but I think all the presentations were super interesting and worth the time. So Samantha, I'm preparing my screen, but please the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Zoe. Thank you for the introduction, Zoe, and also Helen and Neil. Thank you so much. To a certain extent, you know, you've done such a great job. I don't know if I need to fill in that much, but I will try to fill in a bit. But it's always a pleasure to work with our partners. As everybody who's spoken has said, we all work together. We realize that none of this work can be done alone on islands. We have to make sure that we collaborate, and the main thing that we need to do is raise awareness about both the hotlines and portals, and then also the helplines for children to reach out if they need help. So I'm going to try and be quite quick. When were we meant to finish already? I'm just trying to work out timings. We were meant to finish the presentations and have 30 minutes Q&A, but we have until the half hour cut. Okay, and maybe one or two questions that might get answered in my talking. So so hotlines, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what they are, and also what they're not, why we believe that each country should have a hotline, and where they exist today, and where we're creating hotlines, and also how you can set one up. I'll touch on that at the end, so we can probably go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is just the things I'll cover. So what INHOPE is, what the role of the hotline is, why we believe you should create a national hotline, why we believe everybody should have the ability to report online child sexual abuse content to a national hotline in their country, how you can establish one, and then some requirements to become a member of INHOPE. Thank you, Zoe. So we've been in existence since 1999, when we were started with 9 hotlines. As Neil said, the IWF was one of our founding hotlines and is today one of our biggest hotlines, along with ICMEC in America. And today we have 50. In a week, we'll have 53 hotlines. So we have a members meeting next week where we will bring where 3 potential hotlines have applied to become members, and they will be most likely approved for membership next week. So as it says here, we're the leading global network combating online child sexual abuse material, and we do support our members in the removal of online child sexual abuse material. And this is carried out as swiftly as possible, of course, through a shared platform that I'll talk a little bit more about, called ICMEC. And the removal is carried out as swiftly as possible, using, together with our relationships with national law enforcement and national industry partners, and of course all of the member hotlines. And as Helen said about the child helplines, we also are nothing without our members. The hotlines are obviously the movers and the shakers that do the work, that review the content, that get the content taken down, that make sure they have those relationships with their industry partners to do that. So we at INHOPE facilitate the member hotlines work to remove that child sexual abuse content by providing a platform, as I mentioned, called ICMEC. And the servers for that are hosted at Interpol in Lyon. And this might answer one or two of the questions that touched on the ICSA database and Interpol. So INHOPE members share the URLs that are reported by the public, so that a country hosting the content can receive the reports as soon as possible from the country where the report has been made by the member of the public. And then the hotline in the hosting country analyzes that content according to their laws. So in terms of setting up a hotline, this is one of the differences as well. The laws in your country, we need to work on the laws in your country if they are not relevant, or if a hotline would not work in your country. We need to look at the laws and make sure that a hotline would work in your country. So this is why, as Neil mentioned, it does take longer. And as his video mentioned at the end there, it did say, it said in the video, it said something like, and this can all be done very easily. Obviously, setting up a hotline is not done in an easy way, but of course you have that country leadership, ownership, you're employing people in your country, the country is changing the way the whole ecosystem nationally and internationally responds to child sexual abuse material in your country. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. So if the report is confirmed by the analysts that it is CSAM, then they make sure it gets to the hosting provider in the country where it's hosted for removal. And if that material has not been seen before, then it is submitted to Interpol's International Child Sexual Exploitation Database. And there are 69 or 70 law enforcement agencies connected to that around the world today that have access to that, meaning that if a child is at risk today and a report is received by one of the INHOPE hotlines and it goes into the ICSA database because it's not been seen before, that particular image, then through identification from one of those 70 law enforcement agencies around the world who can access and connect to the ICSA database today, possibly that child could be removed later today or tomorrow from harm. So in terms of the hotline's role and why we do this, the role of the hotline is, as Neil said, the role of all the hotlines is the same, and the way he described it and what the IWF does, not in terms of setting up portals, but all of the hotlines work in that same way. So they ensure that the material is removed, and the presence of a hotline makes sure that every citizen in the country has the ability to make a report in their own language and get the material removed. And the report can be made anonymously, and that is the same, as Neil said, for portals. And that's whether it's hosted in the country in which it's found, which is not usually the case, and which is why we do need the whole network of hotlines to collaborate on this, or if it's hosted elsewhere. So they are some of the benefits and purposes of the whole INHOPE network and working together to remove the child sexual abuse material from the internet in the hosting country and from wherever it is first seen and reported. And that goes in both directions. So that's to say that if a report is received in Cameroon or Zimbabwe, I was in both those countries last month setting up hotlines, and they trace it to France, for example, as the hosting country, then it will be sent through ICMEC to France, to the French hotline, to work with their industry partners to remove the content. And the same in the other direction. If France finds something, they will, if France identifies something that is hosted in Zimbabwe or Cameroon, then it will send it to one of those countries. And if that content, again, has not been seen before, then it goes into ICMEC. It goes into ICMEC to get to the other countries. It goes into the ICSA database potentially for victim identification by those 20 criminal intelligence officers sitting in Lyon in Interpol. We are working with more and more organizations in Africa. In July, we will be in Nigeria, Namibia, and Ethiopia with UNICEF and Interpol, working with a number of different local partners. We make sure that ministries, industry, NGOs are all involved. And then there's also, going back to what Helen talked about, she talked about the model national response as part of the We Protect Global Alliance sort of presentation of how to have an ecosystem that responds to child sexual abuse material and child sexual abuse and exploitation generally in a country. The model national response really does respond in a way highlighting the potential for all of the collaborators, all of the stakeholders to work together to really support whether it's the judiciary, legislature, prosecutors, the victims. And there was a question about victims. There are some organizations that specifically deal with looking after victims and their families. So there are, and the model national response really makes sure that all of those gaps, I think there's 22 capabilities, and all of those gaps are responded to. And they make sure that you, as a country, when you're responding to this challenge, this pandemic, make sure that you don't leave any gaps out. So as Helen said quite rightly, it is a blueprint. So we could probably move to the next slide. And the next slide. So setting up, and you can probably click a couple of times, or maybe 5. So setting up a national hotline, as Zoe stated, does mean that your country is taking leadership and ownership. The country understands what this pandemic of child sexual abuse and exploitation is, and it takes, we always talk about the fact it takes a whole village, but it also takes a whole country, and in fact the whole world, to respond. And there is a whole ecosystem, as I mentioned, and each piece of the puzzle, of that puzzle, is needed to take responsibility while industry and government feel more accountable if it's a local, a national response, as we're starting to talk about their children, their neighbors' children, their nieces and their nephews. So by people taking responsibility, they raise the bar, they step up, and they understand that they can be the change and they can make the change. And I think that's the difference with having a hotline where it's an organization of the country really taking the lead. And also in terms of raising awareness, I'll talk a bit about it later. We obviously train the analysts, and we provide a communications toolkit and a number of different ways of raising awareness in the country, because of course there is absolutely no point in having a hotline in your country or a portal in your country if nobody knows about the ability to report, if nobody knows why they're reporting, what they're reporting, that there is a real child behind every image, that that is a criminal act behind every image. So these are some of the reasons that we do believe that every country should have a hotline. And in addition, when you set up a hotline yourself, whether that's as an NGO or a computer association or an internet service providers association, or a company setting one up, or if it's a national authority of some sort, of course, you will have your finger on the pulse as part of the preparation you will have undertaken with us as you prepare to set up a hotline with me and my team. You will have created an online child protection task group in your country through we always have a couple of days of round table where we make sure all those stakeholders come together, and then you continue working with them, probably meeting every 3 months, setting yourself targets, deadlines, actions, how the country can fulfill, for example, the model national response ecosystem elements and capabilities together. And we look at how to respond to all of the challenges that present themselves with the acknowledgement of online CSAM, whether that's prevention, protection, judiciary awareness, or legislative changes, like I said earlier. And as part of that group, that Child Online Protection Task Group that you will set up, you'll have engaged policymakers and government representatives, law enforcement agencies, obviously, to do the work that we help you to do, as you establish a hotline. You need to have a memorandum of understanding with the police in your country. You need support of the Ministry of Justice, often health, education, and the hotline will also, of course, employ people in your country. So they will most likely be your own country's nationals to carry out this work. And of course, that gives people a whole additional incentive, because they're people in their own country protecting their own children. So a little bit about why we do this work. Of course, we do this work, as we've heard already from Neil and also from Zoe, to remove child sexual abuse material from the internet, of course, but more specifically to prevent re-victimization. Because every time a victim's images are viewed, they feel violated again, and they feel abused again. And this also to prevent further harm, ensuring that new images and videos are submitted to Interpol's ICSA database for victim identification, as I mentioned. And Neil mentioned report remove, which is this a new technology whereby people who know their images are out there can send the images of themselves to the hotline, to the IWF, for example, with the knowledge that the IWF will be able to remove them. And NECMEC, our American hotline, has done the same. And both the IWF and NECMEC will be presenting next week to the rest of our 50 hotlines how they can use the report remove and the take it down initiative for removing those self-generated images. So these are all benefits of also having a hotline, that you benefit from technologies that the different hotlines create and set up, and they do often do that. So INHOPE's role here is that we support the members in the removal of online CSAM. And as an INHOPE hotline, as well as directly understanding exactly what's happening in your country and having regular meetings with your law enforcement agency, you are invited, of course, as I say, to our trainings. And there's many possibilities to be involved with a number of projects. We're funded in big part by the European Commission. Also, UNICEF helps support some of our hotlines, as the Save the Children and the End Violence Against Children Fund are also supported by them, and also industry, largely some of the bigger tech titans, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and a bunch of others. And they all help support the work that we're doing to help establish you set up hotlines. And of course, as a hotline yourself, you're in direct contact with the industry in your country, your hosting providers, your social media platforms, or image hosters, the different types of industry in your country, as you will have developed a connection with them for immediate removal of content that you receive that is hosted on their platforms. And I mean, I think I've mentioned quite a lot about training, but the hotline managers and analysts have access to online training every 6 months when we meet in person. And we're also increasingly holding meetings in different parts of the world. At the end of last year, we had a meeting in Singapore with an Interpol training for our analysts. And then earlier this year, we had one in Latin America. So they are more and more in different parts of the world, and that will be happening increasingly too. In fact, if you're on this call and you are a hotline, then we'll probably be seeing you next week. But I was particularly pleased to see that I didn't recognize a lot of the names here, because we do have a lot of the same people often coming to meetings. So I was pleased to see a few names I knew, but I was actually very pleased to see that there were so many names that I didn't know and that were relatively new to me. If we pop to the next slide, then I'll just talk quickly about the benefits of establishing a member of hotline. I think I've touched on most of them already, but we do support and promote we have a growing and very impactful communications team, and they work with us, the network expansion team, to support any organization that wishes to set up a hotline, both as we set you up and also later on, as you become an established hotline. Of course, you need to keep working on campaigns, making sure that organizations, youth groups, churches, different ministries of education, so that it trickles down to schools, that all of those various stakeholders campaign with you, and of course the online platforms. And in fact, Helen touched on the importance of children, for example, knowing how to where to call, and there were maybe campaigns on gaming platforms, and the least clicks possible in places where children would hang out were really the places that we need to make sure that we're raising awareness of our presence. And so they are also, we work with industry too, to make sure in your countries with you to try and help raise awareness of the existence of the hotline. So the analyst training I've touched on. We have peer-to-peer trainings. There are Q&A sessions, so online once a month or more often if they want it, but generally once a month there is a session for all of the 250 analysts around the world. If they want to, they can come onto a call where they can ask each other questions. It's obviously quite a niche subject where you're not going to generally find that many people that are doing this work around the world. So it's obviously very challenging, and a lot of our training involves staff welfare, but it also, of course, is useful for people to be able to talk to other people who are doing that same job. So we do have, like I say, there's various trainings in technology, but also staff welfare support and training. And then we do have the software solutions, ICMEC, that I talked about. There's the technology platform whereby we securely share URLs from one hotline to another for removal, and it also feeds the ICSA database. But then there's also other software solutions are being developed with various police forces around the world. with various software companies and some of our partners. If you look at our website, you'll see more of the kind of projects that we're working on. And there's also Report Box, which is basically hotline in a box, and it's something we can give to you to help you start being able to receive reports of online child sexual abuse material. And once you're able to receive those reports, we can help with the back end of categorization and classification, and you will then be able to know immediately, month on month, what you're receiving from the public, what kind of reports you're receiving. You'll be able to understand trends. You'll be able to see yourself what's happening in your country. All of this has to happen, of course, once you have a memorandum of understanding with your police, which is something that we help you develop. We pop to the next slide. Yeah, that's okay. We'll pop to the next slide. Don't know if you can see this. So this slide and the next slide there, they show an average of 2 years from our first contact with an organization looking to become a hotline, where we work with you on the different aspects. It can take 6 months and it can take up to 2 years. As I said before, we often start with a 2-day roundtable in the country, bringing all of those stakeholders together, and then we work with various industry members, or as many industry members in your country, alongside government and various ministries, to help you set up the framework for the hotline to be able to receive reports from the public, developing the communications and the campaigns and the awareness that needs to take place around that at the same time. And as Helen mentioned, often the helpline and the hotline either sit very close to each other, or they are literally the same organization. So I am in touch at the moment, for example, with 1 or 2 organizations that currently run helplines, but they are looking to also expand, if you like, to run a hotline. And they're 2 very separate entities, of course, because the helpline takes the reports from children or people worried about something to do with child sexual exploitation or child sexual criminality of some sort. But the hotlines in our terminology, and I know that it can be a slightly confusing terminology, but the hotlines in terms of when we're talking about INHOPE hotlines, they receive reports from the public of those URLs, as Neil showed you in one of the reporting forms. So if we can go to the next slide, and then the next slide, just very briefly, the requirements for membership. I've mentioned the memorandum of understanding that every organization must have with their police. This is harder in some countries and easier in others, but one of the essential things that we make sure that you have is a good relationship with your police, with your law enforcement agency, and they sometimes come to the trainings with you. And often what we say is you should have a meeting once you've started the hotline about every 3 months with your police, so that if, for example, you as an analyst are seeing a series, you can make sure the police are aware of that, and we look to make sure that you can kind of train and develop together. There needs to be support from ministerial stakeholders, from, as I mentioned, from industry, the police, as I mentioned, and other NGOs, and anyone else working in this area fighting child sexual abuse material. And we need to have 3 or 4 letters of support. But we work with you on developing these, and once they've come to the round table and we've talked further, then there is a sort of general understanding. And as I said at the beginning, you're setting up this child online protection task force in your country. You need a web reporting form in place, as Neil showed you earlier, and then of course there's a membership application form. Excuse me. And then, of course, there's a membership application form that needs to be filled in. But me and and the network expansion team work with you on all of these different aspects of becoming a member. So I think I've rushed through everything quite quickly. Thank you for listening. My email address is there. And if you have any questions that I didn't answer, that you asked already, or that you have new ones, then please let me know.
Thank you so much, Sam. Very sorry about having to rush, but I think your presentation was still really interesting, really helpful. And again, really appreciate you joining. Just gonna share one final slide, which I'm hoping will be interesting for everybody, because this is going to be just a very quick summary of resources. So where all of us can find their child helpline, their hotline, or their reporting portal. So you have all the links here, all the websites. You will receive those links in your email, after this webinar, when we can share the recordings. And again, really thank you all for joining. I'm afraid I don't even think we have time to answer any questions live. I know quite a few of your questions have been answered by writing. But again, massive thanks to Helen, to Neil, and Sam for their great presentations. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm just checking my notes if there was anything else I should add. No, I think that's it. Again, you will receive everything by email. I noted that some people are interested in receiving the PowerPoint presentations. I'll check with the guest speakers to make sure if that's possible or not. And for anything you need, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You have the email address of all the speakers, hopefully. Otherwise, don't hesitate to send me an email, zkolpar@icmec.org, and I will put you in touch with our colleagues. Very sorry for the rush, but thank you so much for staying until the end. Any last words, Sam or Neil?
Just thank you for hosting and chairing, Zoe. Fantastic job as always.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you so much to Hannah and the entire ICMEC team for making this webinar possible. I will wish you all a good day, and please join us at our next webinar that you will receive news about by email. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you. Bye.